In 1987, 18 children vanished from a school bus. 30 years later, one of them walked into a police station. It was a Tuesday morning in 2017 when the man, looking older than his early 40s, entered the small rural Missouri precinct. His clothes were worn but clean, his face pale, etched with lines that spoke of hardship, not just age. He asked the desk sergeant, a young woman named Peters, if he could speak to someone about the Black Pines trip. The name didn't ring any bells for Peters. She'd been a child herself when it happened. But the man's eyes, filled with a hollow, ancient weariness, made her call her superior. Detective Harding was a man who remembered Black Pines. He remembered the posters, the news reports, the faces of the grieving parents that had papered the county for years. He remembered the school bus, found standing silent on a dirt track miles from its route, packed lunches still on the seats, little jackets slung over the backs. No children, no driver. Just an empty yellow shell. Harding met the visitor in a small, bare interview room. The man sat with his hands clasped on the table. He was calm, too calm. He said, "My name is Daniel. I was one of them." He claimed the others, or at least some of them, were still alive. Harding felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. 30 years. 30 years of silence, of dead ends, of families slowly crumbling under the weight of not knowing. Could this be real? Or was this man a crank, a disturbed individual, drawn to an infamous local tragedy? He had to ask. Daniel simply nodded, as if expecting the disbelief. He reached into the pocket of his thin jacket and pulled out a plain white envelope. It was sealed. Typed neatly on the front were 5 words, "We never left, please listen." The air in the room grew heavy. Harding took the envelope. It felt ordinary, yet it pulsed with an unspoken dread. Daniel watched him, his expression unreadable. He just said, "It's all in there. Please, you have to believe me." Harding carefully slid it open. Inside, there was no lengthy confession, no rambling manifesto, just 4 items. The first was a hand-drawn map, sketched on brittle, yellowed paper. The lines were faint, the landmarks crude, a jagged peak, a twisted tree, a symbol that looked like a broken circle. The second was a set of 4 Polaroid photographs, the colors faded with age. The third was a single sheet of paper, also yellowed, with a list of names. 9 names. Beside the list, another word, handwritten in stark, block capitals. Chosen. And the last item? It was a small, tarnished silver locket, shaped like a heart. Harding recognized it. Or thought he did. He'd seen a picture of it decades ago, in an old case file, belonging to a little girl named Sarah. What did this mean? Chosen for what? And if there were 18 children, why only 9 names? Daniel offered no immediate answers, just watched Harding with those unnervingly patient eyes. The detective felt the weight of years, of a mystery that had haunted this region, settle onto his shoulders. The map looked like a child's drawing, yet it had an unsettling precision in its strangeness. The Polaroids? Harding picked one up. It was dark, grainy. It showed what looked like the entrance to a cave, or perhaps a narrow passage between rocks, half hidden by overgrown bushes. Another showed a group of figures, their faces obscured by shadow and distance, standing in a dim, enclosed space. They wore simple, almost uniform clothing. Was this where they had been? For 30 years? The very idea felt impossible, a story torn from a dark fairy tale. But Daniel was here, real, tangible, and the locket in Harding's hand felt undeniably, chillingly real too. This wasn't just a story anymore. This was a beginning, or perhaps the continuation of an ending that never truly arrived. The questions piled up, each one heavier than the last. Where was this place on the map? Who were the chosen? And if Daniel had escaped, why now? What had finally broken 30 years of silence? The quiet man Daniel just said, "They are in Black Pines. We never left. You have to go there. You have to find them." His voice was flat, devoid of emotion, yet carried an undeniable urgency. The silence that followed was broken only by the hum of the fluorescent lights, a stark contrast to the dark, tangled mystery that had just walked through their door. The old case files would have to be pulled from the archives. This was no longer a cold case. It was burning. The initial check on Daniel's identity began. Fingerprints were taken. He offered no resistance, seemed to expect it all. He gave his full name, Daniel Carter. He said he was 10 years old in 1987. A quick search of the missing children's roster confirmed it. Carter, Daniel, age 10. There was a school photo, a smiling boy with bright eyes, a stark contrast to the haunted man sitting before them. While they waited for fingerprint confirmation from old records, if any existed from that time for a child, Harding focused on the items from the envelope. The list of names, chosen. He read them aloud. Emily, Mark, Lisa, David, Rachel, Ben, Chloe, Michael, Sarah. The owner of the locket. Why these 9? What about the other 9 children? And the bus driver, a man named Peterson, what of him? Daniel simply shook his head when asked about the driver. "He's not with us." That was all he would say. The phrase, "not with us," hung in the air, ambiguous and cold. The Polaroids were passed around the small team Harding was assembling. A younger detective, Jess Reynolds, tech-savvy and sharp, was trying to enhance the images, but their age and quality made it difficult. One Polaroid, the clearest of the 4, showed a room. It was stark, with rough stone walls. In the center, a crude wooden table. On the table, a single unlit candle. It was the background that caught Reynolds' eye. Scratched into the stone wall behind the table was a symbol, the same broken circle that appeared on the hand-drawn map. What did it signify? Daniel, when shown the image, just stared at it. "That's where we ate," he said. Simple, matter of fact, as if describing a school cafeteria, not a prison. The ordinariness of his tone made it all the more chilling. The map was the biggest puzzle. Black Pines was a large, rugged state park, dense with forest, riddled with old mining trails and limestone caves, most of them uncharted or condemned. Finding a specific, unmarked location based on this crude drawing would be like searching for a single tree in a vast forest. But the broken circle symbol, now seen in 2 places, felt like a key. Harding felt a grim determination solidifying. They had to try. They had to go to Black Pines. The thought of other children, now adults, possibly still trapped, still living in the conditions hinted at by the Polaroids, was unbearable. But a more disturbing thought lingered. Daniel had said, "We never left." Had they been there all along, hidden just out of sight, while the world searched and mourned? And what did chosen truly mean for those 9 names? Chosen for survival? Or something far more sinister? The first step was to confirm Daniel's story, as much as they could from this side. Then, they would follow that map into the dark heart of Black Pines. The silence of 30 years had been broken. Now, the echoes were just beginning. Harding needed to know more about the day they vanished. The official report from 1987 was thick with witness statements, timelines, and dead ends. A class of 5th graders from Northwood Elementary, on a field trip to Miller's Creek Nature Preserve. 18 children, their teacher Mrs. Gable, and the bus driver Mr. Peterson. The bus was due back at school by 3 p.m. It never arrived. Panic set in around 4. The bus was found at 6:30, parked on an old logging road, miles off course, in the opposite direction of Black Pines. Keys in the ignition, lunches half eaten, small jackets draped over seats. No signs of violence, no struggle, just gone. The area was searched for weeks. Dogs, helicopters, hundreds of volunteers. Nothing. Not a footprint, not a piece of clothing. It was as if they had evaporated. Theories abounded. A mass kidnapping by a sophisticated group. A tragic accident where they'd wandered off and succumbed to the elements, though no remains were ever found. Even wilder speculations involving cults or unknown phenomena. Now, Daniel Carter sat in their station, a living ghost from that day. He began to speak, his voice low, almost a whisper. He remembered the bus ride, singing songs, Mrs. Gable pointing out different trees. Then the bus turned down a road he didn't recognize. Mr. Peterson had said it was a shortcut. He remembered the bus stopping. Not an abrupt stop, just a gentle halt. Mr. Peterson got out. He didn't come back. Then, a new man got on the bus. Daniel couldn't describe his face clearly. Average, forgettable. The man didn't speak much. He just said they were going on a different kind of trip now. A special trip. Some kids cried. Mrs. Gable tried to intervene, tried to ask questions. The man showed her something. Daniel didn't see what, but Mrs. Gable went quiet after that. Pale. She told the children to be calm, to do as the man said. What did he show her? Daniel shook his head. I don't know. I was scared. We all were. He said they drove for a long time. Then they had to walk, deep into the woods. He remembered it getting dark. That's when they reached the place. The place on the map. The place in the Polaroids. The detail about Mr. Peterson getting off the bus and not returning was new. The official story always assumed Peterson was taken with the children. If Daniel was right, Peterson might have been a victim too, or perhaps a coerced accomplice who then disappeared himself. And Mrs. Gable? What happened to her? Her name wasn't on the chosen list. Daniel's eyes flickered when Harding asked about the teacher. She tried to protect us, he said. They didn't like that. The implication was heavy, chilling. Harding pushed gently. What happened to her, Daniel? Daniel looked away, his jaw tight. She's not on the list. The repetition was stark. It was becoming clear that the list of chosen was exclusive, and perhaps a list of survivors of some terrible winnowing process. The original group was 18 children, 1 teacher, and 1 bus driver. 20 people. Now there was a list of 9. And Daniel, who had escaped. What about the other 9 children? Were they also not on the list? The fingerprint results came back. A partial print from a school art project, kept by Daniel's grieving mother for all these years, matched the prints taken from the man in the interview room. It was him. Daniel Carter was alive. He was telling the truth, at least about his identity. The news sent a shockwave through the small department. Old files were suddenly active. Memories stirred, a sense of disbelief warring with a burgeoning, cautious hope. For Harding, it meant one thing. The map, the Polaroids, the list, they were all critically important. Daniel's story, however fragmented and haunted, was their only guide. He asked Daniel about the chosen. Why them? What made them special? Daniel hesitated. He looked down at his hands. They were strong, he finally said. They learned to listen. He wouldn't elaborate further. Strong? Strong in what way? And listen to whom? The vague answers were frustrating, but Harding sensed Daniel was treading carefully, perhaps out of fear, perhaps out of a deeply ingrained conditioning. The decision was made. A small team would go to Black Pines the next morning. Harding, Reynolds, 2 experienced search and rescue officers, and a medic, and Daniel. They needed him to navigate, to interpret the strange landmarks on his map. Was it dangerous? Daniel nodded slowly. Yes, for you, and for them, if you're not careful. He added, some of them don't want to be found. They believe this is where they belong. This added another layer of complexity. This wasn't just a rescue. It might be an extraction from a deeply rooted, isolated society. A cult, perhaps, that had held these children, now adults, for 3 decades. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the small town. For 30 years, the mystery of the Black Pines children had been a dark stain on its history. Now, a sliver of light, however fraught with peril, had pierced the darkness. Tomorrow, they would step into that darkness, following a map drawn by a boy who had somehow, finally, found his way out. Harding looked at the faded Polaroids one last time before locking them away. The shadowed figures, the stark room, the cave entrance. Tomorrow, these images might become real. The thought was both terrifying and galvanizing. He hoped they were prepared for what they might find. Or who? The morning arrived, cool and gray. The team assembled at dawn, the mood subdued, tense. Daniel was quiet, dressed in the same worn clothes, but they'd given him a newer, warmer jacket. He clutched a small canteen of water, his eyes scanning the tree line at the edge of town as if expecting something to emerge from it. Harding gave the final briefing. They would drive as close as they could to the area Daniel indicated on the map, then proceed on foot. Communication would be by satellite phone, as regular cell service was non-existent in the depths of Black Pines. Reynolds had digitized the map and the Polaroids, loading them onto a ruggedized tablet, but they carried the originals too, tucked safely in a waterproof pouch. Daniel had pointed to a remote northern section of the park, an area known for its treacherous terrain and largely unexplored cave systems. It was miles from where the bus had been found, supporting his story of a long drive and then a walk. Why wasn't this area searched more thoroughly back then? Harding wondered. But 30 years ago, search patterns were different, technology more limited, and perhaps no one ever imagined they'd be looking for a hidden, long-term settlement. They drove for nearly 2 hours, the paved roads giving way to gravel, then to deeply rutted dirt tracks. Finally, the truck could go no further. They were surrounded by dense, old-growth forest. The air was cold, damp, smelling of pine and wet earth. Daniel got out of the truck and stood for a moment, breathing deeply, as if reacquainting himself with a long-lost but unwelcome memory. He looked at Harding. This way, he said, and pointed towards a barely visible game trail heading into thicker woods. The team shouldered their packs. They had supplies for at least 48 hours, though Harding hoped it wouldn't take that long. Each step felt heavy, freighted with the unknown. What kind of life had these children endured? What had shaped them into the adults they now were? And who was the they Daniel kept referring to? The ones who didn't like Mrs. Gable trying to protect the children. The ones who decided who was chosen. As they walked, Daniel began to point out landmarks from his hand-drawn map. A lightning-struck oak, its top branches skeletal and white against the gray sky. A distinctive outcrop of red rock, shaped vaguely like a sleeping animal. These details weren't on any official park maps. They were the secret signposts of a hidden world. After nearly 3 hours of hard trekking, the terrain grew steeper, more difficult. They were climbing now towards a series of limestone bluffs that rose from the forest floor like ancient, weathered teeth. Daniel paused. He was looking at his map, then up at the bluffs. "We're close," he whispered. His breath misted in the cold air. There was a new tension in him, a tightly coiled watchfulness. He scanned the trees around them, his head moving in small, jerky motions. Were they being watched? Harding felt the hairs on the back of his neck prickle. The forest was silent, too silent. No birdsong, no rustle of small animals. Just the sound of their own breathing and the crunch of their boots on the forest floor. Daniel led them along the base of the bluffs to a section where the rock face was deeply shadowed, almost black, and choked with thorny, overgrown bushes. It looked impassable. "This is it," Daniel said, his voice barely audible. Harding looked at the first Polaroid again, the one showing a dark entrance, half hidden by vegetation. It matched. This had to be the place. But where was the entrance? It just looked like a solid wall of rock and thorns. One of the SAR officers, a man named Griggs, pushed aside some of the heavy bushes. Behind them, almost invisible until you were right upon it, was a narrow fissure in the rock, no more than 2 feet wide. It wasn't a cave mouth, more like a deep crack, a wound in the stone. "Is this the way in?" Harding asked. Daniel nodded. "Yes. It goes down. It's tight at first." It was darker than any night Harding had ever seen. A faint, cool, earthy smell emanated from the opening, like a freshly dug grave. The thought was unwelcome. This was it, the threshold. 30 years of mystery lay beyond this dark slit in the earth. What would they find in the depths? And would it bring answers, or only more terrifying questions? The silence from the fissure was absolute, as if it held its breath, waiting. Griggs, the SAR officer, took point. He had a powerful flashlight mounted on his helmet. He squeezed into the fissure, his movements careful, testing each handhold. After a moment, his voice, slightly muffled, came back. "It opens up a bit, after about 10 feet. It's a passage, not just a crack. Looks like it slopes down." One by one, they followed. Harding next, then Reynolds, the other SAR officer, then the medic, with Daniel coming last. The rock was cold, damp against their clothes. It was a claustrophobic entry, the stone pressing in, forcing them to turn sideways. Then, as Griggs had said, it widened into a narrow, sloping tunnel. The beam of Griggs' flashlight cut through the oppressive darkness, revealing walls slick with moisture, the floor uneven and rocky. The air was stale, heavy. How could children navigate this? How could anyone live like this? They moved slowly, carefully. The tunnel twisted, turned, always downward. It felt like they were descending into the very bowels of the earth. There were no sounds other than their own movements, and the drip, drip, drip of water somewhere ahead. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 15 minutes, the tunnel opened out into a larger space. Not a massive cavern, but a chamber perhaps 30 feet across, the ceiling lost in darkness above the reach of their lights. This is where the Polaroids must have been taken. Harding swept his flashlight beam around. Stone walls, rough-hewn. In the center, a crude wooden table and several rough benches, just like in the photograph. On the table, a single unlit candle stub. The air here was still, but there was a faint, almost imperceptible current, suggesting other passages, other chambers. And there was another smell now, mixed with the damp earth. Wood smoke. Faint, but definitely wood smoke. And something else, a faint, musky animal scent, like unwashed bodies. They were not alone, or at least, this place had been inhabited recently. Very recently. Daniel stood near the entrance to the chamber, his body rigid, his eyes darting into the shadows. "He's here," Daniel whispered, his voice trembling slightly. Harding frowned. "Who's here?" Daniel didn't answer. His gaze was fixed on a dark opening on the far side of the chamber, an opening that wasn't visible until they were fully inside. Suddenly, a sound, a soft footfall from that dark opening. Then another. A figure emerged from the shadows. Tall, gaunt, dressed in rough dark clothing similar to what Daniel wore when he first appeared, but even more worn. The figure's face was obscured by the deep shadow of a hood. It stopped just at the edge of the light from their flashlights. For a long moment, no one moved, no one spoke. The tension was a living thing, coiling in the cold, damp air. Then the figure slowly raised a hand, not in greeting, not in threat, but as if to shield its eyes, though their lights weren't pointed directly at it. A low voice, raspy from disuse, spoke from under the hood. "Why have you come?" It was a man's voice, but flat, without inflection. Daniel let out a small, choked sound. Harding stepped forward slightly. "We're looking for the children from the Northwood bus," he said, keeping his voice calm, steady. "We believe they were brought here." The figure was silent for another long moment. Then it said, "There are no children here, only the chosen. And you should not have come." The figure took another step into the light. The hood fell back slightly. The face was pale, with eyes that seemed to absorb the light, dark and deep set. It was a man, perhaps in his late 50s or early 60s. His expression was severe, almost fanatical, and he was not alone. From the darkness behind him, other figures began to emerge, silent, watchful. How many? Harding couldn't tell. This was it, the mid-story spike. They had found them, or rather, they had been found. There were perhaps a dozen of them, emerging like phantoms from the deeper darkness. Men and women, their ages hard to guess in the dim light, and their haggard appearance. Most looked to be in their late 30s or early 40s, the right age for the missing children. They wore the same drab, shapeless clothing. Their faces were pale, their expressions blank or wary, like frightened animals. They moved with a strange, unsettling quietness. Daniel pressed himself back against the rock wall, his eyes wide with what looked like fear. This was not the reunion he had envisioned, if he had envisioned one at all. The man who had spoken first, clearly the leader, stepped further forward, his eyes fixed on Daniel. "You," he said, his voice laced with a cold anger. "You left. You broke the covenant." Daniel flinched but said nothing. Harding intervened. "We're not here to cause trouble," he said. "We just want to know if everyone is safe. We want to offer help." The leader let out a short, harsh laugh. "Safe? We are safer here than we ever were in your world. Your world is lies, sickness. Here we are pure. We are the chosen." The word again. Chosen. What did it mean in this strange, subterranean society? Reynolds, the younger detective, was subtly filming with a small body camera, but her face was pale. The situation felt incredibly volatile. These people had been isolated for 3 decades. Their perception of reality was likely vastly different. "Who are you?" Harding asked the leader. The man drew himself up. "I am Elias. I am their shepherd. I brought them out of the darkness of your world and into the light of truth." He gestured to the others. "These are my flock. They have thrived here, away from your corruption." Thrived? Harding looked at their sallow faces, their thin bodies, the haunted look in their eyes. This didn't look like thriving. This looked like survival, grim and bare. One of the women, her hair long and matted, took a hesitant step forward, her eyes, large and dark, fixed on Daniel. "Danny?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Is it really you?" Daniel looked at her, and for the first time, a flicker of emotion crossed his face. Pain. Recognition. "Lisa?" he breathed. It was one of the names on the chosen list. Elias cut in sharply. "He is no longer Daniel. He is an outsider. He betrayed us." He turned his piercing gaze back to Harding. You will leave this place now, and you will not return. These people are under my protection. We don't need anything from you. But some of them are clearly unwell, Harding stated, noticing the rasping cough of one man, the vacant stare of another woman. We have a medic. We can help. Elias's eyes narrowed. We have our own ways. The strong survive. That is the path. The path? It sounded like the doctrine of a cult. Harding realized direct confrontation would be useless, possibly dangerous. He needed to de-escalate, to find a way to communicate. What about the other children? He asked, his voice softer. There were 18 on that bus. And your teacher, Mrs. Gable, what happened to them? A flicker of something unreadable crossed Elias's face. The unworthy were shed, he said, like dead skin. Only the strong, the pure, were fit to walk the path. Mrs. Gable, she resisted the truth. She clung to the old ways. She could not be enlightened. The chilling finality in his tone left no doubt as to the teacher's fate. And the other children? The ones not on Daniel's list? Elias made a dismissive gesture. They were weak. They could not adapt. This place, it requires strength, resilience. This was horrifying. Elias was admitting, indirectly, that more than half of the original group, including the teacher, had perished or been eliminated. How many of these chosen were even aware of what that truly meant? Daniel finally spoke, his voice stronger now, laced with a desperation Harding hadn't heard before. Elias, they don't all believe. Some of them want to leave. You know they do. Elias whirled on him. Silence! You speak poison. You try to weaken them again. He turned to the group behind him. Is this true? Does anyone here wish to follow this traitor into the world of lies? No one spoke. Their eyes darted from Elias to Daniel, then down to the floor. Fear was palpable in the chamber. But Harding saw it, a flicker of longing in Lisa's eyes, a tightening of the jaw in another man who looked vaguely familiar from the old missing posters. They were afraid, yes, but perhaps not entirely convinced by Elias's doctrine. We need to talk, Harding said to Elias, stepping slightly forward, placing himself between Elias and Daniel. Just talk. No one needs to get hurt. Let us understand what has happened here. Elias considered him for a long moment, his gaze intense, searching. Then he gave a curt nod. We will talk. But they, he gestured to Reynolds and the SAR officers, they will wait here. You and I, we will go to my study. His study? In a cave system? The term was so incongruous it was almost absurd, but Harding agreed. This might be the only chance to learn the full story, to gauge the true situation. He signaled to Reynolds to stay calm, to observe. Griggs and the other SAR officer tensed but held their positions. Daniel looked terrified at the thought of Harding going alone with Elias. Don't, he mouthed silently. Harding gave a small, reassuring nod he didn't entirely feel. He had to do this. Elias turned and walked back towards the dark opening from which he'd first emerged, expecting Harding to follow. As Harding moved to join him, he caught Lisa's eye again. Her lips moved, forming a single, silent word. Help. The silent plea hung in the air, a fragile thread of hope in this oppressive underground world. The real story of the Black Pines children was about to unfold, and Harding knew, with a chilling certainty, that it would be far darker than anyone had ever imagined. Elias led Harding down a narrow, sloping passage, lit by a few sputtering tallow candles set in niches in the rock. The air grew colder, the silence more profound. They arrived at another, smaller chamber. It was stark, but a rough wooden desk and a chair had been set up. On the desk were stacks of what looked like handmade paper, and a collection of strange carved stones. This was Elias's study. Elias gestured for Harding to sit on a low stool. He himself remained standing, a gaunt, imposing figure in the flickering candlelight. "For 30 years we have lived here," he began, his voice low and resonant. "We have created a new world, a better world, free from the poisons of your society." Harding listened, letting him speak. He needed to understand the man, his motivations. "Who were you, Elias, before this? How did you come to do this?" Elias's lips curved into a semblance of a smile, but it held no warmth. "I was a teacher once, like your Mrs. Gable. I saw the rot in your world. The children, they were so innocent, so pure. I knew I had to save them." "Save them from what?" Harding asked. "From you? From your meaningless lives, your addictions, your wars, your endless consumption. I chose these children. I saw their potential. I brought them here to start anew, to build a society based on truth, on strength, on connection to the earth." He explained his philosophy, a strange mix of survivalism, Gnostic beliefs, and a deep-seated misanthropy. He'd meticulously planned the abduction for years. He'd found this cave system, prepared it. "Mr. Peterson, the bus driver?" Elias confirmed Daniel's account. Peterson had been a weak link, easily coerced with threats against his family to drive the bus off course, then silenced permanently once he was no longer useful. "And Mrs. Gable?" "She was a problem from the start," he said, his voice hardening. "She tried to turn the children against me. She filled their heads with talk of rescue, of police. She had to be re-educated. When that failed, she chose her own path." The euphemism was chilling. "And the other 9 children, the ones not on Daniel's list of chosen?" Elias waved a dismissive hand. "The journey was hard. The early years even harder. This place demands resilience. Some were not suited. They fell ill. They had accidents. They faded." He spoke of it as if they were merely substandard crops that had failed to take root. There was no remorse in his voice, only a cold, pragmatic detachment. "The chosen," he explained, "were the ones who adapted, who embraced his teachings, who proved their strength and loyalty. They were the seeds of his new world." "But Daniel left," Harding pointed out. "If this place is so perfect, why did he risk everything to escape?" Elias's eyes blazed. "Daniel was a disappointment. He was strong, yes. He was one of my best. But he was contaminated. He held on to memories of your world. He began to ask questions, to sow doubt. He became a threat to the harmony of our community." His escape was a betrayal. Harding could see the cracks in Elias's facade of control. Daniel wasn't just a loss. He was a challenge to Elias's entire belief system. And now, with outsiders here, that challenge was amplified. "What do you want from us, Elias?" Harding asked. "We know you're here now. We can't just leave." Elias stared at him for a long moment. "You will tell the world that they are happy here, that they choose to stay. You will leave us in peace." It was a demand, not a request. "And if we don't?" Harding pressed. Elias's expression darkened. "Then you will force my hand. This community is fragile. Your presence, it is a disruption, a poison. I will do whatever is necessary to protect my flock, even if it means silencing the source of the poison." The threat was clear. Harding knew he was on dangerous ground. Elias was a fanatic, a man who had lived by his own twisted rules for 3 decades, a man who had already caused the deaths of at least 10 people. He needed to buy time, to get his team and these people out. Back in the main chamber, Reynolds was trying to subtly engage some of the chosen. Most were unresponsive, their eyes downcast. But Lisa, the woman who had recognized Daniel, occasionally met Reynolds's gaze. a flicker of desperate hope in her eyes. Griggs and the other SAR officer stood impassively, but their hands were never far from their sidearms. They were outnumbered, and in an environment these people knew intimately, any rescue attempt would be fraught with peril. Daniel remained pressed against the wall, a silent, tormented observer. He had brought these people here, but had he doomed them all? He watched Lisa, his childhood friend, now a gaunt woman trapped in this subterranean nightmare. The guilt was a physical weight on his chest. Harding returned from his talk with Elias, his face grim. He gathered his team for a whispered conference. "Elias is unstable," he said. "He sees us as a threat to his control. He's admitted, indirectly, that the other children and Mrs. Gable are dead. He expects us to leave and lie for him." Reynolds shook her head. "We can't do that. These people need help. Some of them are terrified. I saw it. The question was, how? A forced extraction could turn violent. Elias and perhaps some of his more fervent followers might resist. And the chosen themselves, how many would willingly leave? How many were too indoctrinated, too afraid of the outside world Elias had demonized for so long? Daniel spoke up, his voice low but urgent. "There's another way out, a smaller tunnel. It's hidden. I used it. It's dangerous, but it leads to the surface, further down the mountain. Elias doesn't know I found it. Or if he does, he thinks it's impassable." This was a potential lifeline. A stealthy evacuation, perhaps a few at a time, starting with those most willing, like Lisa. But it would be incredibly risky. As they debated their options in hushed tones, Elias re-emerged from his study. He had two of his sturdiest-looking male followers with him. His eyes were cold, suspicious. "Your conference is over," he said. "It is time for you to leave." "Now," Harding tried to stall. "We need to assess the medical condition of your people, Elias. It's our duty." Elias's patience snapped. "Your duty means nothing here. You are the sickness." He gestured to his two followers. "Escort them out." The two men moved forward, their expressions grim. This was it. The confrontation was unavoidable. Griggs stepped forward. "We're not leaving without ensuring these people are safe," he said, his voice firm. Elias's face contorted with rage. "Then you will all perish here." He let out a strange high-pitched cry. From the dark passages around the chamber, more of his followers emerged, some carrying crude weapons, sharpened stakes, heavy clubs. They were completely surrounded. The situation had escalated. The fragile hope of a peaceful resolution shattered. In the dim, flickering light of the cavern, the final, desperate act of the Black Pines tragedy was about to play out. Harding knew that whatever happened next, not everyone would be walking out of these caves. The truth of "we never left" was about to claim more victims, or perhaps, finally, free its captives. The tension in the cavern was thick enough to cut. Elias's followers, armed with their primitive weapons, formed a menacing circle around Harding's small team. Their faces, illuminated by the flickering torchlight and the beams of the team's flashlights, were a mixture of fear, fanaticism, and confusion. Some looked ready to fight, their eyes blazing with a dangerous light. Others hesitated, their gazes darting towards Daniel, then towards Lisa, who stood pale and trembling. Elias stood at the forefront, his expression one of righteous fury. "You have brought this upon yourselves," he screamed. "You seek to destroy our sanctuary." Harding held up his hands, palms open. "Elias, think. This doesn't have to end in violence. Let us take those who want to leave. Let the others stay if they choose. But you cannot hold them all prisoners." "Liar!" Elias shrieked. "They are not prisoners! They are saved!" He lunged forward, a sharpened piece of rock clutched in his hand, aiming for Harding. Griggs reacted instantly, shoving Harding aside and tackling Elias. They both went down in a tangle of limbs. That was the spark. Chaos erupted. Several of Elias's more zealous followers surged forward, brandishing their weapons. The other SAR officer, a man named Chen, deployed a stun gun, dropping one attacker, but another swung a heavy club, catching Chen on the shoulder. He grunted in pain but stayed on his feet. Reynolds, though not a combat officer, used her heavy flashlight as a defensive weapon, trying to keep attackers at bay while protecting Daniel, who seemed frozen in shock. Amidst the melee, Harding, recovering quickly, saw his chance. "Daniel! The other tunnel! Now!" Daniel's eyes snapped into focus. He grabbed Lisa's arm. "Come on, we have to go!" Lisa hesitated for a fraction of a second, then nodded, her face a mask of terror and determination. Daniel began to pull her towards a section of the cavern wall that looked like solid rock. But as he fumbled along the stone, a hidden seam became visible. A narrow opening, cleverly disguised. This was the escape route. Harding and Chen fought back to back, trying to create a diversion to give Daniel and Lisa time. Griggs was still struggling with Elias, who fought with a desperate, wiry strength. The medic, a woman named Anya Sharma, was trying to pull Chen back from the thick of the fighting, seeing the blood soaking his shoulder. More of the chosen were joining the fray, some reluctantly, others with a chilling fervor, but not all. A small group, perhaps 4 or 5, huddled together, watching in terror, making no move to help Elias. These were the ones Daniel had spoken of, the ones who doubted, the ones who longed for escape. Reynolds saw them. "Get to Daniel!" she yelled, pointing towards the hidden passage. "Go!" One of them, a young man with haunted eyes, looked at her, then at the chaos, then made a decision. He grabbed the hand of a terrified young woman next to him and pulled her towards Daniel and Lisa, who were now squeezing into the narrow opening. 2 more followed. Elias, finally subdued by Griggs, who managed to cuff him, screamed in rage as he saw some of his flock defecting. "No, you cannot leave! The path is here, stay!" But his words were lost in the cacophony. Harding knew they couldn't hold out much longer. They were outnumbered, and Elias's followers, though poorly armed, fought with the desperation of cornered animals. "We need to fall back to that tunnel," Harding yelled to Chen and Anya. "Griggs, bring Elias! We can't leave him here to regroup!" Griggs hauled the struggling, spitting Elias to his feet. Chen, despite his injured shoulder, provided covering fire with his sidearm, aiming for the legs of the most aggressive attackers, trying to disable rather than kill. It was a slow, brutal retreat across the cavern floor towards the hidden opening. Reynolds was the last one through before Harding, helping Anya guide the injured Chen. Griggs pushed the cursing Elias in, then squeezed through himself just as a heavy rock smashed against the stone where his head had been. The escape tunnel was even narrower and more treacherous than the one they had used to enter. It was dark, damp, and claustrophobic. Daniel led the way, with Lisa and the other 4 escapees close behind him. Harding and his team brought up the rear, with Elias, now sullen and silent, securely in Griggs's grip. They could hear sounds of pursuit from behind them, the angry shouts of Elias's remaining followers. They were trapped in the earth, a desperate flight through an ancient, lightless maze. How far was the surface? Daniel had said it was a long way, and dangerous. Could they all make it? Especially with an injured officer and a hostile prisoner? Each step was a struggle. The air was thin, the path uneven. Several times, people stumbled, caught by unseen rocks or slick patches of mud. But Daniel pressed on, his voice a low murmur of encouragement to those ahead of him. He knew this path. It was his secret, his lifeline. And now, perhaps, theirs too. The darkness was absolute. broken only by the wavering beams of their flashlights. It felt like they were being swallowed whole by the mountain. The bitter truth was that even if they reached the surface, the ordeal for the chosen was far from over. 30 years of isolation and indoctrination had left scars that might never heal. Hours seemed to pass in the suffocating darkness of the escape tunnel. Daniel, driven by a desperate urgency, led them onward. Lisa, her hand gripping his tightly, stumbled often but never complained. The other 4 former chosen followed, their faces etched with a mixture of fear and dawning hope. Chen's shoulder was throbbing, and Anya Sharma, the medic, did her best to tend to it in the cramped, dark conditions, but he was weakening. Elias, dragged along by Griggs, remained mostly silent, his earlier fury replaced by a simmering, hateful resentment. Harding worried about their pursuers. For now, the sounds from behind had faded, but he knew Elias's remaining followers wouldn't give up easily. This tunnel was their only way out, but it was also a trap if they were caught within it. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Daniel stopped. "I can feel it," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "Air. Fresh air." He pointed upwards. There was a faint glimmer of light, far above them, filtering down a steep, narrow shaft. It was the most beautiful thing Harding had ever seen. The final ascent was perilous. The shaft was almost vertical, a natural chimney in the rock, with precarious handholds and loose stones. Daniel, agile and wiry, went first, securing a rope they'd brought. One by one, they made the climb. Lisa, then the other 4, their faces streaked with dirt and tears, their eyes wide as they emerged into the dim twilight of the forest. It was raining softly, a cool, cleansing rain. They stood there, breathing deeply, looking around at the trees, the sky, as if seeing them for the first time. Chen, gritting his teeth in pain, was helped up by Griggs and Harding. Anya followed. Finally, Griggs manhandled the still resistant Elias up the shaft. As Harding stepped out last, taking a deep breath of the rain-washed air, he felt a profound sense of relief, quickly tempered by the grim reality of what lay ahead. They were out. But they were miles from civilization, with injured, traumatized people and a dangerous prisoner. And what about those left behind in the cavern? The ones still loyal to Elias, or too afraid to leave? That was a question that would haunt him. The journey back was an ordeal. They eventually made radio contact with the local sheriff's department, who mobilized a larger search and rescue operation. Hours later, exhausted, soaked, and battered, they were met by a team of paramedics and law enforcement officers. Daniel, Lisa, and the other 4 survivors were taken to a hospital, placed under protective care. Elias was handed over to state authorities, his face a mask of cold fury. The story of the Black Pines children, hidden for 3 decades, exploded into the national news. The world was horrified, captivated, and deeply saddened by the tale of their lost years and their strange, isolated existence. For the families of the chosen, it was a miracle tinged with unimaginable pain. Their children were alive, but they were strangers, adults shaped by trauma and a bizarre ideology. The reunions were hesitant, fraught with emotion, a mixture of joy, grief, and profound bewilderment. How do you reconnect with someone who has lived in another world for 30 years? Daniel, now hailed as a hero by some, struggled with the sudden attention, the noise, the overwhelming complexity of the world he had re-entered. He had spent his adult life in near silence, in darkness, under the iron will of Elias. Freedom was disorienting, terrifying. He found solace only in speaking with Lisa and the other survivors, their shared experience a bond no one else could understand. They had never left Black Pines. Not truly. Part of them would always remain in those dark, damp caverns, marked by the shadows and the twisted teachings of Elias. The authorities mounted an operation to enter the cave system and locate any remaining followers. They found the main chamber empty. Elias's loyalists had vanished, retreating deeper into the uncharted maze of tunnels, taking their secrets with them. Perhaps they would never be found. Perhaps they didn't want to be. The Black Pine site was eventually sealed, a scar on the landscape, a monument to a dark chapter. In the months that followed, Daniel and the other survivors began the slow, painful process of healing, of trying to build new lives. There were therapy sessions, medical treatments, attempts to reconnect with families they barely remembered. Some adapted better than others. Lisa, with a quiet strength, started to paint, her canvases filled with images of darkness and faint emerging light. Two of the others found it too difficult and retreated into themselves, the silence of the cave still clinging to them. Daniel, he found a quiet job working with animals at a rural shelter. He rarely spoke of his time in the caves, but sometimes, on clear nights, he would look up at the stars, a sight he had been denied for so long, and a single tear would trace a path down his weathered cheek. The mystery of the 18 vanished children was solved, but the ending was not neat, not happy. It was a story of loss, of resilience, of the enduring darkness that can exist in the human heart, and the faint, flickering embers of hope that can sometimes lead the way out. The full truth of what happened to every child, every soul caught in Elias's web, might never be fully known. Some stories remain buried deep in the earth and in the silence of memory. Have you ever heard of anything like this? Share your thoughts or stories in the comments.